so maybe you'll say if anyone noticed this kind of stuff. But, you know, I did kind of wonder at the time whether I should do things like, oh, do I need to cover up the fact that I have a tattoo or a nose ring, or do I need to, you know what I mean? Like, do I have to kind of, and I just kind of made the decision when I went on the market that I wanted to be in a department where that was going to be okay. Because once I showed up there, I was going to have to be myself every day. And so people were just going to have to learn how to make peace with that. And I didn't want to be in a place where I wasn't going to be able to be at least most of myself, you know? But, you know, but now that I kind of look back on it, I'm like, wow, that was kind of risky in a way. I mean, it didn't feel that way to me at the time. But now that I look back on it, I think, you know, I maybe wasn't like as realistic as I could have been about the fact that, you know, you might actually be giving up opportunities at jobs, you know, when you sort of allow yourself to be presented in a particular way. But I think that's a decision that everybody has to make. And like I said, I think for me, and the truth is I still feel this way, I know I would actually just prefer not to have a job at a place where I couldn't just kind of show up and be like who I am, you know? But I mean, you have to be aware of the fact that that is a decision that you're making, you know, and you might find yourself in an interview type situation where people aren't necessarily ready for who you are, and you have to be prepared for the fact that that is a risk you're taking.
I was also going to say that I don't feel like I can be completely who I am in my job.
Yeah.
Although there's a lot of things I want to do and I do. But I don't necessarily need to socialize with my colleagues 24/7, right? I mean, if I had free time, I wouldn't choose to hang out with those folks, right? So I think there's things that you can sorry. I just come across as a surprise anyway. But I think there's your professional life, and then there's other aspects of things that you do. And so you might think about, okay, what is it about this position that can allow me to do certain things? And again, you don't have to be like completely yourself there, because I don't want to be completely myself with some of the people that in my departments, right? So, I don't know if that helps.
Can I add?
Yeah, go.
You know, I had a friend whose advisor told her, don't be yourself, at her job interview. And I thought that was the strangest advice ever, because you can be someone else at the job interview and get the job, but like Leslie was saying, you have to show up at the job and be there for at least the next 6 to 7 years, right? And so I think all these suggestions about how to present yourself is really important. What I really liked in terms of my first job when I was at the University of Montana was that all of my colleagues had really well-developed hobbies, which means then, like even before they were tenured, which means then that their private lives were private. They did fly fishing, they were skiers, whatever. But they had well-developed hobbies, and they were like, oh, let's take her skiing on my job talk or job interview. But whatever it meant, I thought this was great, because they have private lives. So there's a public life at the university, and then I can go home and be with the people I want to be with. So on the job interview situation, and when you're talking to them, when you find out about their lives, if they are going to be at the university, if they are at the university all the time, and all the colleagues are like that, then you know that that's what they're like. And if that appeals to you, then that's, you know, who you are. But then if they have well-developed hobbies and full family lives, I mean, I had these future colleagues who were bringing their children to this job dinner. You know, it was this 30-person kind of extravaganza. It was really amazing. And they were so horrified because we were at this place with like taxidermy on the walls. And this is Montana. But I was like, this is amazing. You know, this is so amazing. Something I can talk about, right? Oh, right, Wyoming. That's right. And they were like horrified. They were like, she's never gonna come. She's never gonna come. And like that was the selling point of the whole thing. Because everyone came, all the partners, the children, I mean, and they all came. So it showed that not only did they have well-developed private lives, but then they had a professional life that was not hostile. They were actually friends with each other. So you learn a lot in the job situations, but the advanced preparation, and there's sneaky ways of asking those questions that are illegal, like, so are you interested in the schools? So you have to be prepared for those kinds of sneaky questions, because, I mean, I would probably advise you, you probably will have to just answer. you know, and because if you say no, right, I mean, oh, I can't answer, it creates this kind of level of problem. Because I had someone who was drunk, he was like, do you have kids? And he's like, oh, I wasn't supposed to ask you that, but do you? And what are you going to say to that, right? Because he's being false convivial, but he really wants to know. And so I just went in knowing that if they ask, I'm going to be honest. And sometimes they like it. I had a colleague who went out on the job market and she was pregnant, and everyone was like, you're not going to get your job. But in fact, the school that she got the job at, they were excited because they thought that that would mean that she would stay. I mean, that in itself could be a problem. But you know, it was a selling point for her as a candidate. So things that some people think will be detractors will actually become positives, depending on the situation.
I think you can also do research about the institution. So if they have a really good maternity leave policy, parental policy, or they have a really good spousal partner hiring policy. I mean, those are things we can find out in advance. So I think giving those answers, they'll have different resonances depending on how that institution has established.
I know you have one move on to another question, but just really quickly, I want to underscore
You guys are
something.
actually covering a few questions.
Yeah, that Judy said, because I think it's really, really important, and that is that I think it's tremendously useful when you prepare to go out on the job market to rehearse the answers to questions, or at least kind of have a plan about what you would want to say, because yes, it is true that it's illegal for them to ask you if you're married, if you have a partner, if you have children. They ask those questions anyway. I have been asked on almost every interview I've been on some variation of all of those questions. And even though it's illegal, it puts you in a situation, like Lynn was saying, where you either have to answer the question, or you have to be like, why are you asking me an illegal question? You know what I mean? And no one wants to do that in a job interview situation. So you really are kind of forced into a position of answering. And it does mean that it's useful to be prepared, to kind of decide for yourself, how do you want to answer these questions, and to kind of be ready so that when something pops up, like one of these crazy situations I've had happen to me a million times, to kind of be able to figure out what you want your answer to be.
So our next question, have you noticed any difference in journals that you submitted to in regards to how they respond to either racial, ethnic, or gendered research, considering that's what most of us do in so much? I don't know if you want to go first after.
Yes, I have noticed, because given that my research focuses on stereotyping and prejudice and all that, and the reviewers who are likely to review this manuscript are probably not members of an underrepresented group. So they totally do not relate. They don't understand the relevance. They don't understand what the problem is. Like who cares if Latinos or African Americans are stereotyped? Other groups are stereotyped too. Sorority girls, you know. Exactly. So they compare it to that, you know. So it's hard to get the point across. So like, when I work on my manuscripts, I really have to do it based, like, I have to frame it in a way that, like, look, I'm advancing theory, I'm testing this, and not necessarily, I'm looking at this topic because it's actually something important to look at. So that has been my experience.
So you reframe, you reframe it in another way, so
Exactly.
that people consider it legitimate in some way, shape, or form, even though it should be considered legitimate just for its own basis.
Yeah, I think for US history it's changed a lot. So I can't think of any journals that are openly hostile. Like, Journal of American History is the main US history journal, and it's published a lot more about race. There's also more specialized journals, like Journal of African American History, Journal of Social History. So I think whatever journal you're interested in publishing in, it's really important to take a look at the run of the journal. So maybe take a look at a couple of different issues and see what type of articles they publish. Think about how the articles are framing the significance of the project. I'm teaching a graduate research seminar now, and the students' projects are great. But one of the students is saying, her like big declaration is saying, like, the big significance of this project is, and it just sort of died. Like, there's no big significance. I was like, well, if I'm not interested in X topic, why would I be interested in this research? So you need to be able to kind of frame your project in a way that's really exciting and interesting for people who don't really have an investment in that particular area. And I think that's true for whatever journal we're interested in submitting to.
The next question, I think you guys some of you guys already touched on, but it's the idea of, are you bringing your whole self to work or just parts of you, which I think specifically address that. If so, is that something that you had to relearn? And are there any strategies in doing so? So like if we had worked elsewhere before we came to school, right? Like going to work and being ourselves was maybe not an issue, but in the ivory tower, it might somehow change, and like what strategies do you use to kind of make that turn?
Yeah, I definitely don't bring my whole self to work, and I think there's some things about that are kind of natural and normal, and other things about that can sometimes be problematic. The truth is, I think it's important to think, even though the academy tends to function a little bit differently and we imagine it to be really different, the truth is, at least from my perspective, I feel like the academy is a corporation. It's just a corporation that sells education as opposed to selling something else. And so it does mean that this is kind of a professional environment in the way that any other professional environment is. And so, I just don't think it's kind of fully typical for people to kind of bring their whole selves to their work environment. Like, you get to be your whole self in your private life, you know what I mean? But this is a work environment, and so you kind of have to conduct yourself in a professional way. And it kind of, I think that's kind of the nature of the beast, whether we like it or not. So, there's some aspect of that I think is normal. I do sometimes chuckle to myself about it. Like, yesterday I was on my way to campus for a meeting with the provost and like all of the senior academic affairs, advisors. And as I'm driving, down the highway, I'm like pumping Tupac because that's what I had done. And I just kind of had this flash, like, wouldn't it be funny if like Joe Luna knew that like I was on my way to meet him and I was listening to Tupac? So I mean, I'm not showing up to the meeting and being like, yo, I was listening to Tupac on the way here. It's like, that's not particularly relevant or, appropriate in any kind of a work environment. So, I definitely think,
But it'd be hilarious.
it'd be hilarious. Then I was thinking to myself, I wonder if Joe Ludo even knows who Tupac is.
Maybe he secretly knows.
Right.
Maybe he's a big fan.
That's true. You don't know. And maybe he's not bringing his whole self. Maybe there's parts of him we don't know. So the truth is, I just think kind of in any sort of professional environment, you don't really bring your whole self to that situation. I guess the part of this that I felt like was particularly relevant for graduate students is that I think you really have to be careful, and I think there's probably people in this room who could testify to this. I think you have to be really careful as a graduate student about talking to other graduate students about your life, because wherever it is, the TA offices, the labs, like wherever it is that you kind of hang out and interact with other graduate students, I see a lot of people nodding, become kind of spaces where people not just only talk about their work, they talk about their teaching, talk about their students, and that kind of spills over and you start telling people stuff about your life and what kind of fellowships you have and what your research is about and blah, blah, blah. And that can become really, really dangerous because, I've seen the whole gamut happen to people, things ranging from having, research topics stolen because you talked too much about what you were doing and what your research was about and what archives you were using, and somebody was like, oh, that's a good idea. You know what I mean? So I've heard things ranging from people getting their research or their topics, stolen to, people talking trash. Well, I don't know why that person got that fellowship because I don't know who they think they are. You know what I mean? That kind of thing. I mean, the whole thing. So we're just kind of sharing information about your personal life that you probably shouldn't have shared. So I think that's, the thing as graduate students, that it's important for you to